Okay, and so fairly briefly, just a summary of the reign of Harthacanute. So again, dates in there first of all. So death of his half-brother, 1040, and then he reigns until 1042, whereas if we notice on the first mind map, then Edward the Confessor takes over as King of England. So Harthacanute, these points we made with Harefoot, but we'll make them in a little more detail if we can. So the first thing to talk about Harthacanute is simply when he arrives back into England after his brother's death. Now, just to remember, please, so Harthacanute is the product of the marriage between his father Canute and Emma. Can't make that point often enough. It needs to be absolutely clear to us. Now, we know that he remained in Denmark for the major part of Harefoot's reign. In fact, only ever arriving back into England after Harefoot had actually died. Now, what we know is that he was actually bringing an invasion force with him already, but it didn't prove to be necessary. So actually in 1039, we are told he was bringing 62 warships back into England, but with his half-brother dying, they weren't really that necessary, but he still brought them anyway. What he had also done as well is he had travelled, first of all, via modern-day Belgium, because his mother was actually living in exile. So Emma was in exile in modern-day Belgium in a very famous city called Bruges. So Emma was based in Bruges from probably 1037 until she returned into England with her son after the death of Harold Harefoot. The second point to make is that when he actually arrived back in England, there was one thing that appalled him more than anything else. And what this was actually the death of Alfred. So that murder that had taken place in 1036. Now, this is a fascinating moment because it was very, very clear that Earl Godwine had played a very large part in the story of that murder. Now, we start to know that the Godwines become some of the most powerful people in medieval England, and they certainly, through periods of turbulence, managed to also be great survivors. Now, nice key word to use, a tier 2 word, and I'll make it very, very clear to you. So, Harthacanute made Earl Godwine, and then this is this tier 2 word, put in capital letters so it's nice and clear, complicit in the murder of Alfred. So in the murder of Alfred. And the word complicit means involved with others to commit wrong or wrongdoing or something that is unlawful. And we use the word complicit because we have students who create misconceptions because they will say that Earl Godwine murdered Alfred, which simply isn't true. Earl Godwine was complicit in the story of the murder of Alfred. He assisted, but he didn't physically kill Alfred when he arrived from Normandy. So what happened is that Earl Godwine was actually placed on trial, and he was found guilty. It was very hard for him not to be found guilty. But what he does is he uses a classic Godwine manoeuvre so that he manages to actually survive. And what he does is then he offers a warship to Harthacanute. Now, when we're talking about a warship there, we're probably talking about something that would be the equivalent of, like, with a car, the most expensive Rolls Royce that money could buy. It's probably a warship, rather more for show than sailing in. But this is classic Godwine manoeuvring. So what he manages to do to a certain extent is buy his way out of that guilt. Now, again, just another word. This is what we say is a tier 3 word, because it's specifically a history word. What he was doing here was he was paying something that is called weregild. Now, this is an old Saxon word where if a man was found guilty of killing another, then he would have to pay compensation to the family of the man who had been killed. And the word weregild, gild means price or money, were means man, so it means the price of a man. So the warship itself was seen as a weregild payment to pay his way out of that guilt. Okay, now this is the final point about Canute, and it's simply defined by the fact that we said that, you know, he doesn't rule for more than 2 years. So in terms of his rule itself, because he had been in Denmark for so long, then he was very used to ruling in what we call an autocratic way. So auto, the rule of one, autocratic, in contrast to democratic, rule by the people, autocratic, automated, rule by one. So he'd been an autocratic ruler in Denmark, and when he actually arrived in England, he was not particularly popular with the nobility because he ruled without advice from the royal council. Now, this sits in great contrast to his father, Canute, who we know had become an Anglophile, had accepted Anglo-Saxon institutions, had used the Council of Nobles, the White and Age Moot, to actually rule. So he wasn't particularly popular, okay? So when in England, he ruled without advice from the nobility. It is possible that this is one reason why, on the death of Harthacanute, the leading Anglo-Saxon nobles actually turn to someone that they may see of some Saxon descent. This is Edward, although we know he's been in Normandy for 25 years, rather than turning again to rulers possibly from the Scandinavian countries, which was always a possibility. Okay, and just a final focus question. Now, there's not so much to get your teeth into here, okay, but just keep it nice and straightforward. We know you don't have vast amounts of evidence, but a paragraph about Harthacanute is sufficient, okay? So, explain why Harthacanute was not perceived as a popular ruler in England. Now, not a very easy thing to write, because I can see you thinking that this is the only place you can get information from, but you may make something of the fact that although Earl Godwine had been found guilty, he simply accepted a weregild payment rather than holding him to account. You may also talk as well about his time away in Denmark, how he becomes slightly detached. What I would like you to do is possibly say a little more about how Canute had endeared himself to the Anglo-Saxon nobility because of his way of ruling the country, and that was something that Harthacanute struggled with.